Bruised, disheveled, and trembling, Marissa stood at the back of the gala ballroom as her mother-in-law took the stage to announce her mental collapse to the city's elite. In her hand, Marissa clutched a crumpled paper that felt heavier than a lead weight. A pre-signed involuntary commitment order. The ink was fresh. The doctor's signature was a friend of the family. And the orderlies were already circling the perimeter of the room with a straitjacket hidden behind the velvet curtains. 1 hour ago, Marissa had been fighting for her life in a dark storage corridor, using a fire extinguisher to beat back a man sent to silence her. Now, as the crowd turned to stare at her blood-stained cocktail dress, she realized the trap wasn't just about her sanity. It was about the millions of dollars missing from the offshore accounts she had just discovered. She had exactly 60 seconds to reach the AV booth before the men in white coats reached her. But as she looked into her husband's eyes, she saw only one thing. He wasn't there to save her. He was the one who had signed the papers. The antiseptic burn of the ER stung Marissa's nostrils as she wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist. Gloves still slick from the last patient's blood. A monitor beeped erratically in Bay 3, its rhythm jagged as the nurse's voice cut through the chaos. "Doc, his pressure's dropping now." The words hit like a scalpel. She didn't turn. Her fingers already moved, snatching the crash cart before her brain fully registered the command. A gurney slammed into the wall near the nurse's station, sending a tray of syringes clattering. Someone cursed. The overhead lights buzzed, too bright, too white, turning the exhaustion under her eyes into bruises. She'd been on for 16 hours. Her spine ached where the stool had dug into it during the last suture. But she didn't sit. Couldn't. The waiting room was a sea of hunched shoulders and clenched jaws, the air thick with the metallic tang of fear and the sour note of unwashed clothes. Her phone vibrated against her thigh. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. The third time, she yanked it free, thumb hovering over the screen. The notification glared up at her. One new image from Evelyn. Her breath hitched. The photo loaded in fragments. First the cracked linoleum of their kitchen floor, then the jagged edge of a box cutter, then Evelyn's hands, steady as a surgeon's, slicing through the fabric of Marissa's favorite armchair. The one she'd saved for months to buy, the one Evelyn had called ugly but yours. The phone trembled in her grip. Somewhere, a patient groaned. A code blue blared over the PA system. Marissa's pulse hammered in her throat, but her voice came out even, clinical. "Page or two. We've got a ruptured spleen in Bay 5. She slid the phone back into her pocket. The screen's glow faded against her palm, but the image burned behind her eyelids. Evelyn's smile in the corner of the frame, sharp as the blade in her hand. The shift didn't slow. If anything, the city seemed determined to bleed out on her floor tonight. Between the gunshot wound in Bay 2 and the multi-car pileup arriving via ambulance, Marissa found herself drifting into that hollow, automated state where her hands performed miracles while her mind remained trapped in that photo. Every time she closed her eyes to blink away the sting of salt, she saw the nursery. Not the one in the photo, but the real one. The room she had painted in morning mist blue. The room where the crib stood waiting for a child whose presence was already being erased by a woman who treated people like furniture to be reupholstered. "Scalpel," Marissa murmured, her voice a dry rasp. The surgical assistant handed it over without a word. The rhythm of the ER was the only thing keeping her upright. Here, the problems were anatomical. A bleeder could be clamped. A heart could be shocked. But at home, the hemorrhaging was invisible. A slow leak of trust and sanity orchestrated by a woman who wore pearls like a noose. She moved from the trauma bay to the scrub sink, the water scalding her skin. but she welcomed the heat. It was a reminder that she was still there, still physical, despite the way Evelyn tried to turn her into a ghost. Her phone buzzed again in the pocket of her discarded scrubs. She didn't have to look to know what it was. Another update from the home front. Another piece of her life dismantled while she saved the lives of strangers. The photo that finally broke her concentration wasn't of a chair. It was the nursery. Evelyn stood in the center of the frame, her silver blonde hair perfectly coiffed, holding a stuffed rabbit Marissa's mother had sent. The background was a disaster of overturned bins and stripped wallpaper. Evelyn wasn't just cleaning, she was exercising. The caption read, "Making room for things that actually matter, dear. You've been so overwhelmed. I thought I'd take this off your plate." Marissa leaned her forehead against the cool tile of the wall. The helplessness was a physical weight, a crushing pressure in her chest that no amount of O-negative could fix. She was a trauma nurse, trained to handle the most gruesome spectacles of human fragility. Yet she was currently being bested by an elderly woman with a penchant for interior design and psychological warfare. "Marissa, you okay?" She straightened immediately, the mask sliding back into place. It was Dr. Aris, looking concerned. She offered him a tight, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Just tired, Aris. Double shifts are a bitch. A bitch. She used the repetition to steady herself, a verbal anchor. She needed to call David. She needed to scream, but she knew exactly how that would go. She could already hear his voice, reasonable, calm, utterly compromised. When she finally reached him, standing in the relative quiet of the ambulance bay, where the air smelled of exhaust and rain, the connection crackled with the distance between them. "David, she's in the nursery," Marissa said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "She's tearing it apart. I sent you the photo." There was a long pause. She could hear the rustle of papers on his end, his law office, his sanctuary. "Marissa, honey, Mom called me. She said the room was becoming a fire hazard with all the clutter. She's just trying to help you organize. You've been so stressed lately. Maybe you're misinterpreting her intentions." "Misinterpreting?" Marissa's laugh was a jagged shard of glass. "David, she's shredding things. She's destroying the only space I have left for myself." "Look, you're exhausted," David said, his tone shifting into that patronizing softness he'd adopted lately. "You're working 16-hour days. Hormones, lack of sleep. It does things to your perception. Just come home. We'll talk about it when you're not so reactive." Reactive. The word felt like a slap. She hung up without saying goodbye, the dial tone a mournful hum against her ear. She was alone in this. The realization didn't come as a shock, but as a cold, hard fact, like a diagnosis of something terminal. She couldn't stay in the hospital. If she stayed, she'd lose her mind. But if she went home, she'd find Evelyn. She needed an ally. Sarah was waiting for her at the 24-hour diner 3 blocks away. The place was a neon-lit purgatory of coffee and grease, the perfect setting for a conspiracy. Sarah looked up from her laptop as Marissa slid into the booth, her auburn curls a chaotic halo in the fluorescent light. "You look like hell, Riss," Sarah said, pushing a mug of black coffee toward her. "I am in hell, Sarah." Evelyn's moved from the living room to the nursery. She's framing me, telling David I'm losing it. Sarah tapped a rhythm on the table, her eyes sharp. She's playing the long game. The unstable mother trope is classic. If she can prove you're unfit, she controls the narrative, the house, and eventually, the custody. But we have the gala. The Oak Ridge Gala. It was the one thing Evelyn couldn't touch, yet. Marissa had been the treasurer for 3 years, and the board trusted her. It was her only remaining foothold in the social circle that Evelyn dominated. "I need to take over the full coordination," Marissa said, her voice gaining a sudden, sharp clarity. "If I'm the face of the fundraiser, she can't call me crazy in public. I'll be too visible. I'll use the event to show everyone I'm the one in control." Sarah grinned, a predatory flash of teeth. "I'll handle the board. We'll tell them you're stepping up because the previous chair had a family emergency." Which, technically, isn't a lie. They spent the next hour huddled over spreadsheets and vendor lists, the steam from their coffee rising like incense. For the first time in weeks, Marissa felt a flicker of something other than dread. It was purpose. She was a nurse. She knew how to stabilize a patient before the surgery. This was just triage on a grander scale. But the peace was short-lived. When she finally pulled into her driveway at 3 a.m., the house was a silhouette of suburban perfection, but the air inside was thick with the scent of lavender and betrayal. She stepped into the living room, her boots clicking softly on the hardwood, and stopped. Evelyn was there. She was perched on the edge of the sofa, a glass of amber liquid in her hand, whispering to David. David was slumped in the armchair, his head in his hands. "Just worried about her, David," Evelyn was saying, her voice a silk thread of manufactured concern. The way she snapped at the grocery store, and now this obsession with the nursery. It's like she's detaching from reality. I found her staring at a blank wall for 20 minutes yesterday. Marissa stood in the archway, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I was staring at the wall because you stripped the wallpaper I spent 3 days hanging, Evelyn." David looked up, his eyes bloodshot and weary. "Marissa, you're home. We were just talking." "You were listening to her lie," Marissa said, her voice dropping to that dangerous, clinical calm. "Evelyn, get out." Evelyn rose with the grace of a swan, her expression a mask of wounded motherhood. "I'm only trying to help, dear. You're clearly unwell." "David, perhaps she should lie down. She's starting to hallucinate confrontations again." Marissa looked at David, searching for a spark of the man she'd married. But all she saw was doubt. It was a poison, slow-acting and colorless, and Evelyn had been dripping it into his ear for months. The next few days were a blur of hospital shifts and frantic gala planning. Everywhere Marissa went, the whispers followed. At the country club, the ladies who used to seek her advice on skincare now turned their heads when she entered the room. "I heard she had a breakdown in the ER." One whispered loudly enough for Marissa to hear over the clink of teacups. "Poor David. He's a saint for staying." Evelyn was efficient. She didn't just attack Marissa. She dismantled her environment. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Marissa was leaving the hospital after a grueling shift in the pediatric wing. The parking garage was a cathedral of concrete and shadows, the air damp with the smell of old exhaust. She reached her car, her keys already in hand, when a figure stepped out from behind a pillar. He was large, wearing a faded work jacket, his face a map of resentment. Marissa recognized him instantly. Miller, the contractor she'd supposedly fired 2 weeks ago for shoddy work. "You think you can just toss me aside?" Miller growled, his voice echoing off the low ceiling. "I have kids, lady. You signed that letter. You ruined me." "Miller, I didn't fire you," Marissa said, her hand reaching for the pepper spray in her bag. "I haven't even seen the site in a month." "Liar!" He lunged, his fingers clawing for her shoulder. Marissa didn't panic. The ER had trained her for this. As his weight came toward her, she stepped inside his reach, her elbow connecting with his solar plexus. As he gasped, she pivoted, catching his wrist and twisting it behind his back in a tactical hold she'd learned from her father. "Listen to me," she hissed, pinning him against the side of her car. "I didn't sign anything. Who gave you the letter?" Miller groaned, his face pressed against the cold metal. The benefactor said you were planning to skip town with the gala money. Said you wanted me gone so I wouldn't see the books." Marissa's eyes narrowed. She reached into the open bag Miller had dropped and pulled out a manila folder. Inside was a termination letter on her personal stationery. At the bottom was a signature that looked exactly like hers if she were drunk or trembling. "Evelyn," she breathed. "She said you were crazy," Miller muttered, his fight leaving him. "Said you were dangerous." Marissa released him, her heart cold. "She's the dangerous one, Miller. Go home. I'll make sure you get paid. But you stay away from me." She sat in her car for a long time after he left, the folder clutched in her lap. The forgery was perfect. Evelyn wasn't just gaslighting her. She was building a criminal case. The benefactor had painted Marissa as an embezzler, a woman on the verge of a flight risk breakdown. The game had changed. It wasn't about a nursery anymore. It was about survival. The next morning, the world tilted further. Marissa arrived at the gala office to find the staff in a state of panic. "The catering contract," the assistant stammered, avoiding Marissa's eyes. "It was canceled this morning, authorized by you via email." Marissa didn't even argue. She knew her password had been compromised. She tried to log into her work email, but the screen flashed red. Incorrect password. She was being locked out of her own life. She retreated to her car, her hands shaking. She reached for her bag to find her house keys, but the pocket was empty. She dumped the contents on the passenger seat. Lipstick, stethoscope, wallet. But no keys. She drove home in a daze, the suburban streets of Greenwood Heights feeling like a maze designed to trap her. When she arrived, she had to wait on the porch for 40 minutes until David pulled into the driveway. He didn't greet her. He just looked at her with a heavy, soul-deep exhaustion. "Lost your keys again, Marissa?" "I didn't lose them, David. They were in my bag." "Evelyn found them," he said, stepping past her to open the door. "They were in the kitchen trash, under the coffee grounds." Marissa followed him inside, the scent of garbage and expensive perfume clashing in the air. Evelyn was standing by the island, a glass of water in her hand. "It's a common symptom, dear," Evelyn said softly. "Hiding things from yourself. A way to exert control when you feel the world slipping away. It's okay to be scared." "I'm not scared of the world, Evelyn," Marissa said, her voice a low vibration. "I'm scared of what you're capable of." She fled to her bedroom, slamming the door. She needed to breathe. She reached for the bedside drawer to find her inhaler, but as she pulled it open, her breath caught in her throat. There, nestled among her silk scarves, was her daughter's favorite stuffed rabbit. It had been shredded. The ears were torn off, the stuffing spilling out like entrails. Marissa let out a strangled cry, falling to her knees. This was the rabbit from the photo, the one Evelyn had been holding. The door creaked open. David was standing there, Evelyn hovering just behind him. "Marissa? What's—" David stopped, his eyes landing on the mangled toy in her hands. "She did this," Marissa sobbed, holding the ruin up. "She put it here." Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Oh, David." She's destroying the baby's things now. She's harming the memory of her own child. This is a cry for help, a psychotic break. David looked at Marissa, and for the first time, she saw true fear in his eyes. Not fear for her, but fear of her. "I didn't do this," Marissa whispered, but the words felt hollow even to her. In this room, in this house, the truth was whatever Evelyn decided it was. Marissa realized then that her phone was no longer her own. She'd noticed the battery draining faster, the strange lag when she opened her messages. A mirror app. Evelyn was watching her digital footprint, anticipating her every move. She went to a convenience store and bought a burner phone, her movements clinical and swift. She called Sarah from the parking lot. "She's winning, Sarah. David thinks I'm a danger to the baby. She's shredded the toys and planted them in my room. I've got something." Sarah's voice was tight. "The catering money? It didn't just vanish. I tracked the wire transfer. It didn't go back to the club's general fund. It went to an offshore account in the Caymans. I'm trying to get the account holder's name, but it's shielded." "I know whose it is," Marissa said. "I need to get into the country club office. The physical ledger. Evelyn's been paying the staff off the books." The country club was a fortress of old money and high hedges. Marissa approached the administrative wing through the kitchen entrance, hoping to avoid the main lobby. But as she reached the heavy oak doors of the office, a man in a black security uniform stepped into her path. "Members only, Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his voice a dull monotone. "I'm the gala chair. I need the files." "You've been relieved of your duties," he said, his hand moving to his belt. "Orders from the board, and Mrs. Caldwell Sr." He stepped forward, his bulk forcing her back into the kitchen. The air was sweltering. The smell of roasted garlic and dish soap thickened the heat. "Move," Marissa commanded. He didn't move. He lunged. He pinned her against a stainless steel prep table, his forearm pressing into her throat. Just behind her, a row of industrial ranges glowed orange with heat. "You're making a scene, Marissa," he whispered. "Why don't you just go home and take your medicine?" Marissa felt the heat of the stove against her back. She didn't struggle against his arm. She reached out, her fingers closing around a heavy silver serving tray drying on the rack. With a grunt of effort, she swung it with everything she had. The edge of the tray caught him squarely on the temple. The sound was a sickening thud. He crumpled, his eyes rolling back as he hit the tiled floor. Marissa didn't wait to see if he was breathing. She bolted into the office, her lungs burning. She tore through the desk drawers, her hands flying over folders and invoices. There, tucked behind a stack of menus, was a small leather-bound ledger. She flipped it open. It wasn't club business. It was a payroll. Names of security guards, waitstaff, even the club's general manager, all receiving bonuses from a private account. And at the bottom of the last page, a digital routing number for the catering refund. The money hadn't been lost, it had been stolen. She snapped photos of every page with her burner phone, her heart racing. She had the proof of embezzlement. She had the proof of the payoff. But as she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. A message from David. "Marissa, I've spoken to a lawyer. We're seeking temporary custody. I can't let you stay in the house with the baby anymore. Evelyn showed me the marks on your arms. Why didn't you tell me you were hurting yourself?" Marissa looked down at her arms. Beneath her sleeves, there were deep, jagged scratches. She hadn't felt them. She hadn't made them. She realized with a jolt of pure horror that she'd slept through a sedative. Evelyn had drugged her tea and marked her skin like a piece of livestock. She wasn't just losing her reputation. She was losing her child. The gala was less than 3 hours away. Marissa felt like a ghost haunting her own life. bruised and desperate. She met Sarah in a park, the shadows of the trees stretching long and skeletal in the twilight. "The auction items," Marissa said, her voice trembling. "I checked the vault. They're fakes, Sarah. The diamonds are glass, the paintings are prints. She's going to let me run the auction, then discover the fraud and blame me for the theft." Sarah handed her a slip of paper. "I tracked her car's GPS. She's been making trips to a public storage facility near the club, locker 412. I think that's where she's keeping the real items. And maybe more." Marissa didn't hesitate. She drove to the facility, a windowless concrete block that felt like a tomb. She found locker 412, but as she reached for the latch, a hand clamped over her mouth. It was Evelyn's driver, a man built like a mountain, his eyes cold and empty. He threw her against the metal door of the locker, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the narrow corridor. Marissa kicked out, her boot catching his shin, but he didn't flinch. He wrapped his hands around her throat, lifting her off the ground. "You should have stayed in the hospital, Doc," he rumbled. Marissa's vision began to spot. She clawed at his face, his eyes, but his grip was iron. Her hand brushed against something cold and heavy on the wall, a fire extinguisher. She yanked the pin, not to spray him, but to use the canister as a club. She swung it with a desperate, dying strength, the base of the tank slamming into the side of his head. He staggered, his grip loosening just enough for her to slip away. As he lunged again, she sprayed the chemical foam directly into his face. He blinded, screaming, clawing at his eyes. Marissa didn't stop. She grabbed a heavy bolt cutter from a nearby maintenance cart and smashed the lock on 412. Inside, the light flickered over a wooden crate. She pried it open. The real auction items were there, the Van Cleef necklace, the charcoal sketches, the heirloom watches. But there was something else. A blue folder. She opened it and felt the world go cold. It was a pre-signed commitment paper, an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric hold, signed by Dr. Sterling, Evelyn's oldest friend and the head of psychiatry at City General. The date was for tonight. At the gala, Evelyn wasn't going to wait for a trial. She was going to have Marissa hauled away in front of the entire city, a screaming madwoman removed for her own safety. By the time the 72 hours were up, Marissa would have no career, no child, and no voice. She looked at her reflection in a polished silver tray from the crate. She was covered in dust, her hair matted with sweat, her arms bruised and scratched. She looked exactly like the woman Evelyn wanted the world to see. "Fine," Marissa whispered, her voice a jagged edge. "Let's give them a show." The Oak Ridge ballroom was a sea of silk and champagne. Evelyn stood on the stage, the light of the crystal chandeliers reflecting in her perfectly coiffed hair. She looked like a queen, her voice a melodic trill of grief as she addressed the crowd. "And it breaks my heart to say that our dear Marissa cannot be with us tonight. She's been struggling with a very private, very difficult health crisis. We ask for your prayers as she seeks the help she so desperately needs." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the room. David stood in the front row, his face a mask of stone, behind the heavy velvet curtains of the stage. Marissa moved like a shadow. She'd slipped in through the service entrance, avoiding the two white-coated orderlies waiting by the main doors. She reached the AV booth, her heart hammering a rhythm of pure adrenaline. The technician turned, his eyes widening. "Hey, you can't." Marissa didn't use a tray this time. She used a pressure point at the base of his neck, a move she'd used 100 times to calm violent patients in the ER. He slumped into his chair, unconscious before he hit the desk. She grabbed the cable for the master projector. On stage, Evelyn was continuing her eulogy for Marissa's sanity. She's a wonderful girl, really. But the pressure of the trauma center, it simply broke her. We've had to make the difficult decision to... The microphone cut out. The massive screens behind Evelyn flickered to life. It wasn't the gala's logo. It was a video. The room went silent. On the screen, a grainy, high-angle shot showed a hallway. A bedroom. Marissa's bedroom. The audience gasped. In the video, Evelyn entered the room. She looked around, her expression cold and calculated. She pulled a stuffed rabbit from her pocket. She took a pair of surgical scissors from her bag and began to methodically shred it, her face showing no emotion as she stuffed the remains into Marissa's drawer. "What is this?" Evelyn shrieked, turning toward the booth. "Stop this at once." But Marissa wasn't finished. She swiped the tablet Sarah had given her. The screen shifted. Now, it was a spreadsheet. The offshore account transfers, the forged termination letters, and finally, the psychiatric hold document. Blown up so large that every person in the room could see Dr. Sterling's signature next to Evelyn's. Marissa stepped out from behind the curtain. She was still bruised. She was still disheveled. No, she stood with the posture of a woman who had walked through fire and found she liked the heat. "The only health crisis in this room, Evelyn," Marissa's voice boomed over the speakers, "is yours." The crowd was a sea of frozen faces. David was staring at the screen, his mouth agape, the scales finally falling from his eyes. "You're a thief," Marissa said, walking toward Evelyn. "You embezzled the legacy fund years ago. You needed a scapegoat because the audit was coming. You didn't want to save me. You wanted to bury me." Evelyn's face contorted, the mask of the elegant widow shattering to reveal the monster beneath. "You ungrateful little bitch. I built this family. You're nothing but a nurse from the gutter." She lunged, her manicured nails clawing for Marissa's eyes. David was on the stage in a heartbeat. He caught Evelyn's arm, his grip firm, his face twisted with a disgust so profound it seemed to age him a decade. "Enough, Mother," he said, his voice a low, broken growl. The police, who had been called by Sarah 20 minutes earlier, moved in from the wings. As they led Evelyn away, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stared at Marissa with a cold, dead hatred that promised a long, slow war. But Marissa didn't care. She felt David's hand on her shoulder, a tentative, pleading touch. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. There would be time for that. Or there wouldn't. She walked out of the ballroom, past the orderlies who were now looking at their shoes, and into the cool night air of Oak Ridge. When she got home, the house was quiet. The scent of lavender was gone, replaced by the smell of rain and old wood. She went to the nursery and sat on the floor, surrounded by the ruins of her blue wallpaper and her shredded dreams. She took a deep breath. It was the first time in months she'd been able to fill her lungs completely. She reached out and picked up the head of the shredded rabbit. She could fix it. She was a nurse, after all. She knew how to suture. She knew how to heal. And for the first time, she knew she was going to be just fine.